Hi, I'm Randy Williams, sometimes known as the Nutty Professor of Wing Chun, and for good reason. And today I'm going to show you a new contraption that I've devised with the help of James Bajik of Warrior Martial Arts Supply. And what we're going to do is show you guys what we call the Ba Cao Yu, or the Octopus Wooden Dummy. Now the Octopus Wooden Dummy looks very similar to the normal wooden dummy, except for the fact that it has an additional 2 upper arms and an additional 2 lower arms that the normal wooden dummy doesn't have. Now, one thing you'll notice about the Octopus Dummy is that with these extra arms that it has on the upper and lower levels, what you have is basically the same relationship that the normal 2 upper dummy arms have, 45-degree opening. You have that same relationship between these 2 arms, and you have that same relationship between these 2 arms. Now on the lower level, you've got the low arm where it always is, but you have another low arm at the same relationship as these 2, but down lower and offset. So the effect is that you've got a middle arm between these 2 arms, just like having another regular dummy in front of you. But it happens to have the same relationship here and here, and here and here. But because of the offset, this falls into the middle, and therefore you once again have a normal dummy relationship that you would have with your regular wooden dummy, with only a slight offset and backwards of the normal offset. So you have a chance to work 2 different offsets. And it's not much of an offset because of the way James has designed it. The offset is very minimal. But the offset that you see is opposite of what you have on a normal dummy on this side. And the same as a normal dummy on this side. In the middle, they're even. So you now have 2 sets of arms that you can work with, and you can do a lot of things on this dummy that you can't do with a regular dummy. Now I know a lot of people would see this and think it's really strange, and I've already seen people commenting that, more arms won't do you any more good, and that's not exactly correct. If you understand how to use this, which I'm going to show you a little bit of, you're going to find out that there's a lot of things that you can do on this dummy that you can't do with a regular dummy that more closely approximate real combat, and without having to make those little adjustments that you have to make on your normal dummy to create the same effect. So the most important thing, and this dummy has a lot of different uses, you'll see, but the most important difference between it and the regular dummy is in what I call V-stepping. I do a lot of stepping in CRC and Wing Chun, what's called Noi Sin Wai, outside facing step, and I step on this imaginary V in front of me, and it's for the purpose of gaining the advantage of facing, meaning facing my live area or my frontal area to my opponent's dead side or his back. Now, what happens with the wooden dummy, the Octopus Dummy, is that I'm able to do techniques exactly the way I would do them in the street or in sparring, and not have to modify them the way I do with the normal dummy. So for example, if I get James to come in here, and we get into, let's say, what I call an open relationship, meaning James can date who he wants and I can date who I want. In a normal fighting technique in CRC or Wing Chun, a typical V-stepping technique, which is designed to get me the advantage of facing, would be if James was attempting that lead jab to my jaw. And what I would do instead to counter that is I would step off on what I would call the V, and then do an inside facing step and now be behind him. So once again, it looks like a step to the outside and then another small step to the inside, which gives me his back. Now that same thing could have been accomplished if he was in the other closed relationship. I would do the same step on the other side with the V step here and another step and face, and once again I've got his back. And that's one of the staple footworks, if that's a word, of CRC or Wing Chun. We do a lot of this V step and then another small inside facing step, which leaves us facing the opponent's back. Now with the traditional dummy, the standard wooden dummy, which let's say for example this arm weren't here and this arm weren't here, which by the way, if you don't want to use the octopus as an octopus for whatever reason, you can remove the 4 arms and have a normal dummy. So let's say we had the traditional dummy here and it looked like that. Now if I wanted to practice from an imaginary closed relationship, what I would have to do to practice this technique in an imaginary closed relationship is I would have to take my step here, and when I did my inside facing step, all I would have to face would be this blank side of the dummy without any arms or anything for me to work with. and I would just have to imagine, doing a chain of punches at my opponent's side. But when I have the actual setup correct, here, what happens then is that instead of making my step and then facing just the blank side of the dummy, I can come over here and work, and I have arms to work with and continue to practice my technique as though my opponent had reacted and turned to face me as a result of my first move. So it would be the equivalent of my opponent turning back towards me and throwing another punch. So I now have this arm which I can work with from this advantage of facing position instead of working it and imagining it was there. What I can now do is create other drills which also, besides using the facing aspect of the dummy, I can also create drills where I practice a move more realistically the way it would be done in a fight without having to shift things with my footwork and make it fit the dummy but not necessarily fit the combat situation. I'll give an example. If James were in here, and let's say for example the technique was going to be, let's say James was going to throw a straight punch which I was going to stop with pak, and then he was going to throw a hook punch and I was going to stop it with tan pak. So once again, the first one came and I pivot pak. When the next one came, it was a tan pak. Now look at where my hands go in relation to the center line and in relation to my first pak. Watch the first one. The first pak, see where it goes on the center line? The connection between my core and James's core. But when that next hook comes, watch where, see where my hands went? Now, if I was on a wooden dummy doing that same technique and I did the pivot pak, and I wanted to go to a tan pak to stop that second hook, if I went to this arm, it would be exactly the same as that street technique without me having to change it. Now, yes, I can imagine going pak, tan pak, pak, tan pak, pak. I can imagine doing that on my regular standard wooden dummy, and I have done for years. But with this dummy, I could do, for example, pak, tan pak, pak, tan pak, pak, tan pak, pak, tan pak. So I'd hit the original pak and then follow with that. Tan paks out to a line that more closely approximates a hook coming at me. Now in the same way, this low arm in the position, or the lower and upper arms, the extra ones in that position, give me a more realistic feel when I do things that involve an outside facing move which push the dummy arm further away. Now in the past, I would always have to say, due to the inflexible nature of the dummy arm, I can't fill in the blanks. And there'd be a lot of moves that I would do in the dummy form that I couldn't finish because it would be, well, because the dummy arm won't move, I can't, oh, wait a minute, now I can. And so that's why I do that. In a similar way, if I was doing, for example, like a gang da, normally you practice your gang da like this, don't you? Okay? You practice your gang da like that. Now if you look at the position of my arm, a real gang da done this way would still get me hit. And why? Because of the inflexible nature, etc., etc., I can't push that dummy arm to the extent that I'd like to push it in a real fight that would prevent it from hitting me. But guess what? When I practice with the octopus, I can do the gang da, which is more closely related to the real gang da that I would do in a fight, that would push that guy's arm or leg far enough out that it wouldn't hit me. So that's one of the other advantages. Now, those are some of the reasons that I created this dummy. Yes. Another good reason for creating this dummy are two-man drills that we can do simultaneously. And we can do the two-man drills either going against each other or going with each other, so that the dummy feels alive and coming against you, or the dummy feels alive and kind of going with you. So it gives you different kinds of feelings, which we'll show you in a couple drills. Then we have these drills I came up with that I call interactive drills. And those are going to be drills where we go back and forth, the two men working it, between working a technique on the dummy and then meeting each other and hitting on the outside to each other. Returning to the dummy, working the dummy, and returning back to each other with alternating techniques. So we can create patterns where we can practice techniques and go back and forth between the dummy and a person. And that really illustrates to you the relationship between the dummy and a real person in a real fight, and shows you here's the difference and here's the sameness of working a wooden dummy and working with a person. So, that's one more. Now, another thing that you can do with this octopus dummy, now not to say you can't do it with your normal wooden dummy, because I have done for years, but I can do much better ground fighting drills with this dummy than I could have with my old dummy. Now, in the old days, and you got to forgive me, I got an injured knee. In the old days, I would do practice techniques on my knees in front of the dummy, and I would only have this arm to work with. So if I wanted to work, for example, something like gang jam, I would have to do a jam sao, which is really kind of stunted, and a gang sao, which is kind of stunted, and I wouldn't be able to really feel how I would use gang jam sao in reality. Well, now what I can do is I can practice moves like, say, Kwan sao on the ground and use that lower arm the same way that I would use, or rather the leg, the same way I would use the lower arm. So I have drills and techniques where I can practice going from a low-level move to maybe a mid-level move, and then maybe stand up to a high-level move and then come back down. So we have drills that work that. And so all in all, you'll see that the extra arms have a purpose. They're not just for decoration. They do serve a purpose, and they do enable you to do a bunch of things that you couldn't do with your normal wooden dummy. Alright, now I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how you can use the dummy to work together and then to work against each other. And I'll show you how that works. So let's say that we both take the Moi Kwan Sao outside rolling arms block position. So what happens now is, as we both do one rep, see we're moving the wooden dummy with each other one. And now, what happens is if James just stays there and I do one rep, we can go against each other. And it gives a whole different feeling to the drill. Alright, now another drill we can do, and it's kind of a cooperative drill that we can do, is that we'll both face the wooden dummy in inside facing what's called Loi Sin Wai Gang Jam Sao. We'll step slide Kwan going against each other, and we'll pivot Kwan going against each other. So we'll step and face, step slide, pivot, step and face, step slide, pivot, step and face, step slide, pivot, step and face, step slide, and pivot. Now, we can do that same cycle going with each other. So while James is doing his step and face gang jam here, I could be doing my gang jam here. As we step slide Kwan together, and then pivot Kwan. So it could be step and face, step slide, pivot, step and face, step slide, pivot. And so each time we work, we can either go with each other or go against each other. Alright, now another interactive drill we can do is one where we actually use each other besides the wooden dummy. So for example, let's say we were both in a position where James is throwing a punch on the dummy and I'm doing a bong. We both come back to jam, and he does his punch and I do my bong. So we go back, and same thing, jam, same thing, back, same thing, back, same thing. So we work like this, and here, and this, and then back in. So you get a little dose of the dummy, and then a little dose of reality. Back to the dummy, and back to the reality. And so that's one way we can work it. Now we can also alternate that, so that this time, I'm doing the punch and James is doing the bong. I come back, I'm doing the punch and James is doing the bong. I come back, I'm doing the bong and James is doing the punch. I come back, I'm doing the bong and James is doing the punch. Come back, I'm doing the punch and James is doing the bong. Come back, I'm doing the punch and James is doing the bong, you see? So we can work that drill both different ways. Right. Now another drill that you can do by yourself is, again, more closely approximating the reality. Is, for example, I could hit this thing with jam the way I would in a normal combat situation and grab chop, simulating grabbing this arm, but of course it's not going to move, so I imagine that and put my chop in with a step. But now, imagining the layover trap, I can grab that far arm and get the simulated feeling of both of my arms leaning over the dummy. So I can back brace jam, step up, and then lay over. This is the old-fashioned way. I can back up, step slide, and lay over with the long arm, and more closely approximate what it really feels like to do what I call a layover lansao trap. So back brace, grab, chop, layover, back brace, grab, chop, layover, and using that long bridge layover, that long layover that gives you the feeling of your arm laying across two of your opponents, which is, it feels more like what it feels like in reality. Now what I can do is practice that V step that I talked about, stepping to the outside to get the superior angle of facing. And I can practice that a couple different ways, as if imagining both an open and a closed relationship, as if my opponent kept changing sides each time. So for example, the way I would do that in an open relationship, that short step, and then turn around and hit here, I can practice it that way. So I can go step on the V, step and face, back to position, step on the V, step and face, back to position. Or I can practice it as though I was in a closed relationship and step on the V, step and face. And go back to imagining an open relationship, step on the V, step and face. On how to use the octopus is to use it in the ground fighting reference. Now obviously, just like you could with your old-fashioned wooden dummy, you could practice your blocks on the center. But what you couldn't do with your old-fashioned wooden dummy was to do something like pock, down, pock, pock, down, pock. So you can work the same yet foot yi combinations that you would do standing up, you can do them on your knees. And you can simulate the same kind of, hip pivoting instead of foot pivoting that comes from the buji form that you would do in a ground situation. So instead of your pivot pock, you would have to hip pivot pock. And instead of pivot tanda, hip pivot tanda, back to the pock. Pivot, hip pivot, hip pivot. So you can practice that little ground fighting hip pivot that comes from that special buji pivot that comes in the third form. So we could do different things like that. Now again, using the leg as you would have used the low arm in a standing position, you can do things like, for example, you could go pivot your hips and then do, for example, instead of a tanda, you could tanda and then back to pock, pock, tanda, pock, pock, tanda, pock, and work that. You can work, as I said, wingchun. It feels more the way it feels when you actually use it. So you can practice the low moves like this. And then if you want to work it from a one-legged position that some lineages of Wing Chun call guaima, I don't know why they say that, but if you can practice from the guaima position, you can practice, for example, a repetition of the same movements, or you could go one moi kwan sao, for example, on the low line, one here, one up. Then you can come back down, either another high one to change sides, that would leave you on the other side down low. So you can work different drills at different levels on this dummy that you can't do with the regular dummy. Now, something else you can do with this dummy that you can't do with your regular wooden dummy is practice your leg blocks in succession in a more realistic way. For example, you can take your leg block, for example, fuksat, and then go into a tan leg. So you can go fuk, tan, and work it in a similar way that you would in chi gyuk. And you can have the stop kick or the gyuk going to the other one, to the block, kick, down, around, kick, bring it up, out, in. So you can work chi gyuk manipulations in a lot more realistic manner than you can with the traditional wooden dummy.